The wind rolled across the Colorado Plateau, stirring up sand that glittered like ground glass in the sun. Heat pressed down heavy as molten metal, and the light cut hard against the cracked earth. A wagon train creaked its way through the dust, wheels groaning like the bones of the land itself. Amara Langston sat on the back bench, dress powdered red, straw hat tied tight under her chin. She had left St. Louis 4 days ago, crossing sunburnt plains and jagged hills, with little more than 2 trunks, a few books, and the faint hope that a place called Redemption Creek might let her begin again. A place where no one knew her skin or her past. Then came the gunshot. The sound cracked the noonday stillness like lightning through dry timber. A horse screamed. Someone on its back tumbled down into the dust. "Keep moving!" the driver shouted, snapping his whip. The wagons lurched forward. But Amara was already leaning out, sunlight stabbing her eyes. Not far ahead, through the haze, a man lay face down in the road. Blood spread dark across his shoulder. His horse, a paint stallion, brown and white, stood trembling beside him, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with fear. Before she could think, Amara jumped. Her boots hit the hardpan, throwing up red grit to her knees. "Are you out of your mind?" the driver yelled, but she didn't look back. The air stung of gunpowder and heat. She ran, heart hammering, until she dropped beside the fallen man. Rolling him over, she saw a face weathered by the sun, a rough jaw, and an old scar slicing from his mouth to his ear. Blood seeped from a fresh wound high on his shoulder, soaking the faded fabric of his shirt. Amara pulled a scrap of white cloth from her bag, the lining of a dress once pretty, now torn, and pressed it hard to the wound. "Can you hear me? Stay with me." A low groan escaped him. His eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes of green-gray, strange, cool, and deep, like the shadowed water of a forest lake. The sight of them stopped her for a heartbeat. "Don't touch me," he rasped, voice dry as sand. "Be quiet. If you can talk back, you're not dying yet." She tightened the cloth, feeling the faint pulse beneath her palm. The wound wasn't fatal, but he was losing blood fast. With quick hands, she unbuckled his belt and looped it around his shoulder as a tourniquet. Then she listened, his breath shallow but steady. Looking around, she saw only open grassland. The wagons were gone. Wind and horse remained. "Can you stand?" she asked. He grimaced, tried to rise, failed. She slid an arm beneath him. He was heavy, solid with muscle, sweat, and dust, and the smell of blood and leather clung thick between them. "Your horse?" she asked. "Call him if you can," he muttered. She whistled softly. The stallion pricked its ears, hesitated, then came trotting toward them. The man's brow furrowed in surprise. "He doesn't come for strangers," he said, breath ragged. "Maybe he knows I didn't pull the trigger." Their eyes met again, no longer only wary, but tired too, like 2 souls worn down by the same kind of loneliness. "What's your name?" she asked. "Silas," he said shortly. "Silas Grayson. Amara Langston. And I won't leave a man to die in front of me, stranger or not." Something flickered across his mouth, a half smile, half sneer. "In this country, kindness'll get you killed. Lucky for you, I haven't learned fear yet." She heaved him upright. Blood soaked through her sleeve, hot against her skin. When he mounted, his body sagged toward her, breath warm against her neck. And in that brief, dangerous closeness, Amara realized her heart was pounding, not only from fear. "My ranch," he whispered, 5 miles north. "Then that's where we're going." She swung onto her horse, gripped the reins, and they started across the burning plain. Behind them, the sun threw long shadows, and high above, vultures began to circle. But they wouldn't be fed that day, for somehow, in all that dust and blood, both had found a reason to keep living. And so, on that blistering afternoon at the edge of Redemption Creek, two souls who should never have met rode side by side, toward a story that would change them forever. Dusk had settled by the time they reached his land, a long stretch of prairie that sloped down toward a silver ribbon of creek, where water caught the fading light like breath against glass. The house appeared after a bend in the trail, gray wood, weather-stained and silent under a cottonwood tree. The walls were roughened by wind and time, the chimney dead cold, with only a trace of ash left at its mouth. Amara helped Silas down from the horse. He tried to stand on his own, jaw clenched, the tremor in his left shoulder betraying pain he refused to voice. "The key's under the stone," he muttered. She knelt, fingers brushing the cool dust until she found it. The door creaked open to the scent of old timber, leather, and dry smoke. She guided him to the bed by the window, then eased the blood-stiff jacket from his shoulder. The skin around the wound was swollen and red, fever already rising. "You need it cleaned and stitched," she said, steady and calm. "No need. I've had worse. Without help, you won't make it through the night." His gaze lingered on her face, the bronze of her skin, the dark, moonless night eyes. Something in them quieted him. He nodded once. Amara built a fire, the scent of pine resin curling into the air. She boiled water, tore strips of linen, and worked with the precision of someone who had done this before. When the needle pierced flesh, Silas didn't cry out. He gripped the bed frame instead, breath thick and heavy. When she finished, she bound the wound and wiped the sweat from his brow. "You need rest." He nodded, eyes unfocused, as though seeing a place far beyond the room. As she turned to fetch water, his voice caught her. "You shouldn't stay. I don't take favors, and folks around here, they won't be kind if they see you here." "They weren't kind to begin with," she said softly, a faint smile touching her lips. "I just do what's right." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in her eyes stopped the rest of his words. Strength, yes, but also a worn gentleness, like someone who'd fought too long as to keep standing. Night deepened. Moonlight spilled through the cracked window, painting the floor in pale stripes. The wind moved along the porch, carrying the distant murmur of the creek. That sound pulled at her, reminding her of the field hospital nights, the labored breaths, the smell of blood and disinfectant, the quiet after someone slipped away. She sat near the bed, the unfinished spool of thread still in her hand. The moonlight rested on his face, broad brow, a slightly crooked nose, the scars that mapped his skin like a history no one dared retell. A low groan. She turned. Sweat glistened on his temple. His lips moved. "Sarah." The name left him on a sigh. She watched, his hand tightening in the blanket, brow furrowed in a dream that clearly hurt. Something in her chest ached, not from jealousy, but understanding. Amara rose, dipped a cloth in cool water, and brushed it across his fevered forehead. "Sleep," she whispered, voice soft as wind. "No one can harm you here." He didn't answer. But his rough hand found her wrist, held it weakly. His skin was hot, her own cool from the water. Neither moved, afraid the moment might break. She stayed there, his fingers curled around hers until his breathing steadied. Outside, moonlight shimmered over the creek like 1,000 broken mirrors. She looked toward it, wondering why her heart felt so still in the home of a stranger. Maybe it was the sound of the water, the same resilient flow she carried within herself, a soul that refused to dry even after too much pain. That night, Amara Langston did not sleep. She sat listening to the wind seep through the cracks, to the faint murmurs of the man beside her. Each time he whispered, "Sarah," it felt like touching a memory she wasn't meant to hold, yet it tethered her there, quietly. When dawn brushed the horizon, the first light slid across his face. For the first time she saw it, not the scars or the hardness, but the faint pulse of life beneath them. Silas Grayson was still alive, not just breathing, but trying to find his way back to something brighter. And Amara, who had spent her life saving the dying, could no longer tell whether she had rescued him or herself. Morning mist still clung to the wild grass when Amara prepared to leave the ranch. Silas helped her fasten her small pack to the saddle, his left shoulder stiff, each movement betraying the wound that had not yet healed. The rising sun caught the pale scars on his face, faint but unforgotten. "You should rest another day," she said quietly. "Nothing here worth doing but resting," he replied, squinting toward the fields. "You plan to stay in town?" "As the new school teacher, I haven't got much of a choice." "Then keep your distance," he said after a pause. "I don't want anyone caught up in my business." Amara's lips curved faintly. "If people mean to talk, they will. I've lived with that my whole life." He studied her for a long moment, his green-gray eyes catching the morning light. There was something unshakable in her calm, something that made him tilt his head as if seeing her for the first time. "I'll ride you part way," he said. They rode south together, the wind carrying the scent of wild mint and the steady rush of the Silverhorn Creek winding below. When the road began to show the faint tracks of wagons and boot prints, Silas stopped his horse. "You can find your way from here." Amara looked ahead at the small town rising through the haze, wooden roofs, chimney smoke curling into the dawn. She turned to thank him, but he'd already touched the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Redemption Creek, Miss Langston." Then he wheeled his horse around, leaving her alone in the golden dust of the road. The town was small but carried the weight of a place that had once boomed too fast and broken just as quick. Weathered wooden buildings lined the main street: saloon, tailor's shop, bank, and a whitewashed church. Every eye followed as she rode past. A woman in a sun-faded apron paused outside the general store, squinting hard. A man slicing tobacco stopped mid-motion, watching her from under his hat brim. No one spoke, but the silence pressed thick, settling on her skin like grit. She stopped before a 3-story white house with a faded sign, "Widow Matthews's Boarding House." The door opened to reveal a tall woman with neatly pinned silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. "You're the new teacher?" "Yes, Amara Langston. Second floor, room 3, supper at 6. Her tone wasn't unkind, but warmth had long since worn away. As Amara set her valise down, the woman gave her a measured look. "Word travels fast," Mrs. Matthews said. "You're from St. Louis." "That's right." "And you met Silas Grayson on your way here." Amara paused. "News moves quickly here." "In this town, even the wind gossips," the widow replied. "If you want my advice, keep clear of him. He's not the kind to bring a woman peace." Amara only nodded. Sunlight slipped through the curtain, filling the room with the scent of dry wood. Warnings like this were not new to her. She had heard them in every place she'd ever gone. About her color, her voice, her difference. She smiled gently. "Thank you. I'll find my own peace." Her first class met in a small wooden building at the edge of town. One blackboard, a few rough benches, windows propped open to the breeze. 22 children sat staring at her, wide-eyed, quiet. A boy yawned until he caught her gaze, then ducked his head, embarrassed. "For our first lesson," Amara began, voice even and warm, "we'll learn how to listen." She turned to the board and wrote, "Knowledge is freedom." A girl with straw-blonde hair raised her hand. "Ma'am, what does freedom mean?" Amara faced her, light from the window softening the lines of her face. "It means learning to think with your own mind." Children were different from adults, curious instead of cruel. When she bent to guide them, she caught her first smile of the day, a boy offering her a tiny daisy, freshly plucked. "Found it outside, ma'am. It's for you." She took it, placing it on the desk. Out the window, far beyond the yard, she glimpsed a lone figure on horseback. Hat brim low, shoulders squared, watching the schoolhouse from the ridge before vanishing behind a shimmer of dust. She didn't need to guess who it was. Silas Grayson, the man with a wound still bleeding beneath his shirt, and eyes that held a light no one else in town dared to meet. Amara looked back at the blackboard. The word freedom stood bold against the pale slate. She smiled faintly to herself and whispered, "Yes. Freedom begins with not fearing the way they look at you." Saturday afternoon lay still as glass. Sunlight drifted over the prairie, brushing the tall grass and turning the Silverhorn Creek into a ribbon of liquid silver. Amara walked slowly along its edge, her earth-colored dress whispering against the reeds. She hadn't planned to wander far, only to find a little quiet after a week of stares and whispered words. But quiet, as always, had a way of leading her where she didn't expect. Across the water stood a paint horse, head lowered to drink. A soft breeze shifted, and then she saw him. Silas Grayson. He leaned against a cottonwood trunk, one hand on the reins, the other buried in his coat pocket. The wind lifted his hair, exposing the scar that cut from cheek to neck, something that made others turn away, but made her pause. "Lost your way, schoolteacher?" His voice was low, rough-edged, half teasing, half guarded. Amara smiled faintly, removed her gloves, and sat on a rock near the bank. "I followed the water. It brought me here." He studied her a moment, then guided his horse across the shallow creek. Sunlight danced on the ripples around his boots, scattering like shards of glass. When he stopped before her, she saw how the green of his eyes softened in the evening light. "They talk about you," she said quietly, not accusing, not curious, simply honest. "That's what they do," he replied, settling on a fallen log across from her. "What did they say this time?" "That you blew up the mine 3 years ago, that you seduced the Blackwell girl, then left her to die." She spoke the words slowly, watching him instead of the water. Silas didn't answer. For a long while only the creek spoke, its soft run over stones like the earth's own sigh. When he did speak, his tone was steady but worn thin. Sarah Blackwell isn't their story to tell. He drew a folding knife from his pocket, opening and closing it, something to keep his hands from trembling. "She was the only person who ever believed I could be more than a dirt farmer. We planned to leave together. Her father found out, had me tied in his barn and beaten until I forgot my own name. Then they cut my face so I'd remember my place." Amara said nothing. There was no drama in his telling, only a heaviness that settled like dust after a storm. "She died that winter," he went on, eyes fixed on the water. "Locked in her room. No fire. Pneumonia took her before I could reach her." A bird crossed the sunlight, its shadow gliding over the creek. Amara followed it, then looked back. Silas sat hunched slightly forward, shoulders bowed as if carrying something too long to ever set down. "And the mine?" she asked softly. "Collapsed 3 years later. 8 dead. I was seen riding away. That's all they needed. Every story needs a villain, and I was already marked." He gave a hollow smile. "Since then, I've been Redemption Creek's monster." The wind stirred again, carrying the smell of water and clay. "People fear what they don't understand," she said at last. "Maybe they fear that you survived." And they didn't. He looked at her then, long enough that she turned her gaze to the water. She picked up a pebble and tossed it in. The ripples spread outward, distorting his reflection, scarred, bent, yet unbroken. "Look at me," he said quietly. She did. The light through the branches painted his face in shifting gold and shadow. The scar pulled at his mouth, making his half-smile look like something torn between pain and memory. "They see the scars," he murmured. "They think that means danger." "And I," she answered softly, "see a man who's been hurt so deeply, he's still here to prove it." He said nothing. After a moment, his hand brushed the horse's neck, a slow, steady motion. "You're the first stranger who isn't afraid of me." "It's not courage," Amara said, her eyes tracing the glittering line of the creek. "It's knowing what it feels like to be seen, and still unseen." Neither spoke again. The current hummed gently between them, not dividing, but joining in silence. When Amara rose, the sunlight had turned to amber. "If you don't want them to keep telling their version," she said, "maybe it's time you tell your own." "To who?" he asked. "To whoever still believes you can." Then she turned, walking along the bank, her figure fading into the dusk. Silas watched until the wind swallowed her shape. Then he looked back at the creek, where her reflection lingered a moment longer than she did. For the first time in years, the stillness in his chest wasn't empty. It was peace. Because someone had finally listened. Rumors in Redemption Creek never needed wings. Within days, the town knew the new colored school teacher had been seen by the creek with the scarred outlaw, the monster named Silas Grayson. Whispers slipped through the saloon, carried down the church pews, and landed outside the schoolhouse door, where women tugged their children past her as though shame could be caught by touch. Late Friday afternoon, as Amara gathered her books, a shadow fell across the doorway. Velvet coat, silver-tipped cane, the heavy scent of expensive cigars. Gerald Blackwell. "Miss Langston," he said, his voice loud but without warmth. "You've got the whole town talking, and not for the lessons you teach." Amara lifted her head. Dust floated through the angled light. "People always talk, Mr. Blackwell. The question is what they say." He stepped inside, cane tapping rhythmically across the wooden floor. "You're a teacher, a model of propriety, and yet you keep company with filth like Grayson." He sneered. "You're dragging the town's reputation straight through the mud." Amara placed the stack of papers on the desk, her voice even. "If a school's honor depends on denying compassion, perhaps it's the mirror that needs cleaning, not the mud." For a beat, his eyes flickered, somewhere between surprise and disdain. "You've got a sharp tongue, but I'm not a man to challenge." "And I," she replied, calm as a steady flame, "am not a woman to belittle." The air thickened. The clock ticked once, loud as a gunshot. Blackwell leaned closer, his breath reeking of smoke and whiskey. "Out here, Miss Langston, the one who controls the water survives. Cross me, and you'll die of thirst." She didn't move. Then we'll see which runs longer, water or truth. His knuckles whitened around the cane. Finally, he turned, his voice cold as mine dust. Forget Grayson, before forgetting becomes impossible. The door slammed behind him. Night came early that evening, as if the whole town held its breath. Amara sat in her rented room, lamp burning low over an open notebook. Outside, wind clawed at the shutters, carrying the distant sound of thunder, a voice of the frontier itself, warning that kindness here was a dangerous thing. A knock broke the silence. When she opened the door, Silas stood there, coat dusted gray, something wrapped in cloth beneath his arm. "Word is, Blackwell came to see you," he said, voice low, weary. "Word travels fast. Everything here does." He nodded once and set the bundle on the table. "Brought this. Thought your students might need it." She unwrapped it. An old atlas, leather-bound, pages yellowed with age, hand-drawn borders, seas without names. "Found it in the storeroom," he said. "It was my mother's. She taught in Missouri." Amara traced the cover with her fingertips, lamplight glinting along the curve of her nail. "Thank you. This is worth more than gold." "Gold makes rich men," he murmured. "Learning makes free ones." They sat together at the small table. The fire in the stove cracked softly, the only sound between them. 2 cups of tea steamed faintly, the room warm with pine and dust. Amara opened the atlas, her finger following the red and blue lines of forgotten borders. "Have you ever been far from here?" she asked. "Once, down near the Mexican border, back when I was in the army." "And I crossed the Ohio River once," she said quietly. "Thought freedom waited on the other side. Turns out, it was just another kind of beginning, with the same old fear." Silas studied her face, slow and careful, as though reading a language few remembered. "You're not afraid now? Not after what they've said?" She smiled faintly. "Of course I am. But there are 2 kinds of fear, Silas. One that makes you hide, and one that reminds you you're alive." He said nothing. His hand, scarred and calloused, rested near hers on the table. She didn't move away. The space between their fingers held a quiet heat, fragile and real. "Some scars can't be seen," she said softly. "They hurt all the same," he answered. They sat that way for a long while, saying nothing more. The oil lamp flickered, throwing 2 shadows close together on the wall. Outside, the wind still prowled over rooftops, but inside that small room, something new had begun, something tender and frightening in its honesty. A warmth neither dared name, but both already felt. That evening, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Inside Mrs. Campbell's house, lamplight glowed gold across rough wooden walls. The long table was crowded, farmers with calloused hands, faces browned by sun and hardship, voices low but burning. The air was thick with the smell of strong coffee and oil smoke. Amara sat among them, silent. She didn't speak much, only listened. When she lifted her eyes, she sometimes found Silas looking at her, not with suspicion anymore, but with a quiet recognition, the kind that said, "I see you." She felt that look more deeply than words. When the meeting ended, boots shuffled, chairs scraped, and one by one the men disappeared into the night. Mrs. Campbell laid a gentle hand on Amara's shoulder before leaving. "You reminded them," she said softly, "that right and wrong aren't just words in a book." Amara smiled. The older woman went inside, leaving the porch to the 2 of them. The night sky was clear as glass. From the ridge, the wind carried the scent of wild mint and the steady murmur of the Silverhorn Creek below. Silas leaned against the post, a half-burned cigarette glowing between his fingers. The small flame lit his scar, turning it into something less like a wound, more like proof of survival. "Do you think they can win?" Amara asked, eyes tracing the sweep of stars above the hills. He took a breath. "Hard to say. Blackwell's got money. Men. But maybe this time he's met folks with nothing left to lose." "And you?" she asked quietly. He exhaled, slow and white in the cold. "I used to be afraid of a lot of things. My past. The way people looked at me. The idea that if I ever let someone close, I'd lose them too." Her voice was a whisper. "Fear doesn't go away, Silas. We just learn how to walk through it." The wind moved her hair, brushing her cheek. Moonlight slid across her face, turning her skin the color of warm honey. Silas saw it. The light, the calm, the strength that came from somewhere deeper than courage. He stepped closer, hesitant, as if nearing something fragile enough to vanish with one wrong move. "You shouldn't stay near me, Amara," he murmured. "You've said that before," she replied softly. "And yet, I'm still here." Silence settled between them, thin as glass. Their breathing was the only sound. Silas lifted a hand, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was small, careful, but within it lived everything he'd never learned to say. Amara didn't move away. She lifted her head slightly, and for the first time, they were close enough to share the same breath. The kiss came the way wind touches water, gentle, hesitant, inevitable. When it happened, the world seemed to still. The creek, the wind, the distant hum of night, all fell silent beneath the sound of two hearts finding the same rhythm. Inside the house, the fire in the hearth flared once, sending light through the window. It caught their pomum, shadows on the porch, two shapes leaning toward each other. His arm slid around her waist. Her hand rose to his shoulder, where the scar of his old wound still pulsed faintly with life. Through the fabric, she could feel his warmth, the quiet proof that he was still here, still fighting the cold that had once claimed him. Neither spoke. There was only moonlight, the flicker of fire, and the smell of mint in the wind, witnesses to a moment that didn't need names. Two lost souls, finding in each other the stillness they hadn't known in years. When she finally drew back, the night had deepened. They sat together on the porch steps, looking out across the dark hills. The silver horn shimmered faintly below, a mirror of the sky. "I used to think my life would end in silence," Silas said, voice low. "Then you came along, and silence stopped feeling like the end." Amara turned to him, her smile slow, eyes bright in the half-light. "Silence only hurts when you're alone in it." They stayed that way for a long time, until the cool wind swept across the valley, making the lamp flicker beside them. In that trembling light, something had changed. Not loud, not certain, but real. A warmth had found its way into the space that once felt frozen, and far beyond them, the silver horn kept flowing, like a quiet promise that some things, no matter how broken, could still move, still breathe, still love. The moon was high and full, its light so sharp it carved black lines of shadow across the ground. The air carried the damp chill of a changing season, and the plains were too quiet. So still it felt like the world was holding its breath. Inside Mrs. Campbell's house, supper was long finished. The old woman cleared the dishes while Amara stood by the window, fingertips brushing the edge of the curtain. Silas had gone to check the stables, leaving his lantern burning low by the gate. Everything seemed calm, until, from the eastern ridge, faint lights began to appear. 3, then 4, then more. Mrs. Campbell frowned. No one rides out this late. Silas stepped in through the door, hand instinctively finding the holster at his hip. Bar the door, Amara. Her voice steadied. Who is it? He didn't answer, only said, If I tell you to run, run. Moments later, hooves struck the dirt outside. Dust swirled, and the acrid scent of gunpowder drifted through the air. The door burst open without a knock. Gerald Blackwell stepped inside, flanked by 3 broad-shouldered men in dark coats and wide-brimmed hats. The air dropped cold. Well, Blackwell said, voice smooth with mock amusement. The rumors were true after all. His eyes found Amara, those calm, dark eyes that refused to bow. So this is where you spend your evenings. Silas moved between them, voice low and steady. She's a guest here. You've got no right to barge in. Blackwell laughed, the sound scraping the small room like a blade against wood. Right? I am the right in this town, Grayson. And Miss Langston, he turned toward her, works under my authority as president of the school board. Amara met his gaze without blinking. I'm a teacher, Mr. Blackwell, not one of your pawns. Silence stretched. Blackwell stepped closer, moonlight washing his face pale. I won't have you dragging my school's name through the mud with your evening company. A letter of dismissal will be on my desk by morning. You'll lose your position, and what little reputation you have left. Silas clenched his fists. Leave before I make you regret it. But Amara's hand found his arm, a single touch that stilled him. She stepped forward, voice quiet but unwavering. You can take my job, but you can't silence me, she said. You think I don't see what you're doing? Buying up every acre from here to the creek, choking the town one well at a time. And when people resist, you ruin them. You call them criminals, just like you did to him. The words landed heavy. Blackwell's expression twitched, just once. His men shifted uneasily behind him, waiting, but he only gave a thin smile. You've got a bold tongue, schoolteacher. He struck his cane against the floor, the sound sharp as a gunshot. I won't warn you again. Redemption Creek has no room for those who forget their place. Then he turned and strode out. The others followed, boots echoing, and soon the night swallowed them. Mrs. Campbell shut the door, her jaw tight. He's afraid, she muttered. If he's threatening you in public, he's losing his grip. Amara sank into a chair, her hands trembling faintly. Silas laid a hand on her shoulder. You shouldn't have provoked him. She looked up, eyes clear. If I stay quiet, he wins. I've lived long enough to know. The strongest voice isn't the one that shouts, but the one that refuses to bow. He studied her, the oil lamp flickering between them. You don't understand him, Amara. Blackwell doesn't just crave power. He consumes it. Land, water, people who dare to say no. Then I'll say no, she said simply. If he threatens me, I won't leave. And you, Silas Grayson, don't decide for me how I fight. He froze, the truth of her words sinking in. For a heartbeat, no sound filled the room but their breathing. Their defiance shared, wordless but undeniable. Outside, the cottonwoods trembled under the moonlight, their leaves whispering like an unseen crowd. The pale glow fell across their faces, hers steady, his shadowed. And for the first time they stood not as outcasts apart, but as two who had chosen the same side. No more words passed between them. They didn't need them. The decision had already been made. In the steadiness of her gaze, in the quiet rise of his chest, in the courage born that night under a merciless moon. And beyond the walls, the silver horn kept flowing, whispering its quiet promise. Water can be dammed for a while, but never forever. The summons came on a fog-heavy morning while Amara was writing on the board. A small girl burst through the door, breathless, holding out a sealed envelope stamped with the school board's crest. "Mrs. Matthews said to bring this right away, ma'am." The note inside was brief, its words sharp as wire. "Special hearing this afternoon. Your attendance is mandatory." No sender, only a single signature. Gerald Blackwell. By evening, the whole town seemed to be holding its breath. The schoolhouse meeting room stood beside the church, walls darkened by years of smoke and dust. Every bench was filled, storekeepers, farmers, mothers clutching shawls, faces tight with curiosity and fear. The smell of sweat and chalk clung to the air. At the front sat Blackwell, framed by the board members in their Sunday coats. His black vest was spotless, his expression sharper than the polished gavel he tapped against the desk. "We gather," he began smoothly, "to consider the moral standing of Miss Amara Langston. A teacher must embody virtue, not controversy, and sadly, Redemption Creek has heard far too much about her conduct." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Amara rose. Her dress was plain blue, her hair pinned neatly, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice soft but clear, "if decency is measured by gossip, then perhaps no one here is fit to teach the truth." A flicker passed through his eyes before the practiced smile returned. "You deny association with Silas Grayson, a man suspected of arson, murder, and rebellion against lawful order?" "You said suspected," she replied, "not proven. And no one, not even you, has proved a thing. I did not deny knowing him. I saw a man wounded and helped him. If that is a crime, then perhaps kindness is outlawed here." Whispers stirred again. Some faces nodded, others turned away. Blackwell's gavel struck louder. "Your skill as a teacher is not in question, but your judgment is. A woman who cannot keep her own reputation clean cannot shape young minds." Amara's fingers tightened around the back of the chair, but her tone stayed calm. "The dirt, sir, is not beneath my feet. It lies in the hands of those who twist lies to rule this town by fear." The room froze. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Then, from the back, came the sound of boots against wood. All heads turned. Silas Grayson stood in the doorway, tall, coat dark, the lamplight cutting his face into shadow and scar. He said nothing at first, but his presence alone silenced the whispers. The way he looked at her, steady, wordless, was both apology and vow. Blackwell's lips thinned. "I don't recall inviting you, Grayson." "I didn't come to defend myself," Silas said, his voice low and steady. "I came to watch truth being twisted into a weapon." Amara turned slightly toward him, and in that small motion, her shoulders lifting, her breath easing, the fear vanished. Blackwell stood, the confident rhythm faltering. "If Miss Langston wants truth, she shall have it. Sheriff Davis?" The town's aging sheriff stepped forward, hat in hand. His voice was gravelly. 3 years ago, the Silverhorn mine explosion took 8 lives. Grayson was seen near the site. No proof of guilt, but what?" Amara interrupted. "No proof, and yet you accused him?" The sheriff shifted uneasily. "Somebody had to be blamed." "Because Blackwell wanted it so," Silas said quietly. The tension thickened, heavy as smoke. Then, from the back of the room, a woman's voice rose, frail but clear. "It wasn't him." Every head turned again. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, gray hair pinned beneath a bonnet, leaning on a cane. Mrs. Jenkins, widow of one of the miners who'd died. "I've kept silent 3 years," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "But no more. My husband managed supplies at the mine. He told me Mr. Blackwell ordered cheaper blasting powder to cut costs. It was unstable. It went off early. My husband wrote it down, kept the records at home. They disappeared the night he died." The room broke into whispers. Faces turned pale. Blackwell's composure cracked. "Lies," he hissed. "You have no proof." She lifted her trembling hand. "I do. A copy, hidden in the back of his Bible." Gasps filled the air. The gavel struck wildly, Blackwell shouting for order, but his voice was swallowed by the rising noise of the crowd. Amara stood still, heart pounding. Behind her, Silas did not move, solid as a tree in a storm. She turned toward him. Their eyes met. Nothing needed saying. Just a nod, a quiet promise. "We've begun, and we won't stop here." A gust of wind blew through the open window, snapping the curtains like wings. Moonlight spilled across the table where Blackwell's gavel had fallen, its sound still echoing, sharp, final, like the first verdict of justice finally waking. The air in the hall still felt heavy after Mrs. Jenkins's testimony. Blackwell hammered his gavel again and again, voice hoarse. "Order! This is no place for madmen to invent slanders against a man's good name." Murmurs rippled like waves. Amara looked around and saw faces once cowed now starting to waver. Silas stood beside her, shoulders taut, like drawn bowstrings, his eyes fixed on Blackwell, the man clinging to power like a plank in a storm. Then a man rose from the rear benches. His suit was a little rumpled, his tie crooked, and his face showed the trace of a sleepless night. It was Thomas Holloway, the town banker, the same man who had once lent Amara books and awkwardly asked after her in her first days here. All eyes turned to him. Blackwell frowned. "Mr. Holloway, this is hardly the hour for your cheap displays of conscience. Sit down." Thomas did not sit. His voice rang out, not loud, but clear enough to hush the room. "For 3 years I worked at First Redemption Bank under Mr. Blackwell. I believed he built this town, but I can't be silent any longer." Blackwell narrowed his eyes. "Watch your words. I can have you fired before sundown." Thomas stayed calm. "Do your worst. But first, let people hear this." He opened his leather satchel and drew out a sheaf of papers. The sound of the pages flipping cut through the silence. "These are copies of the loan contracts you signed with Manson and Coney, the mining outfit. Before the explosion, you ordered the switch to cheaper explosives, just as Mrs. Jenkins said. After the blast, you used the insurance money to buy up land around the Silverhorn for a song." A murmur rose. Blackwell sprang to his feet, face flushing. "Lies! Those documents are forged." "No," Thomas said, his tone cold and steady. "They bear your signature. I kept the originals in the bank out of fear, out of cowardice, thinking silence was safe. But when I heard Miss Langston dragged before the town as a spectacle, I understood silence is a sin." He laid the stack of papers on the board's table. "This is evidence. He caused the explosion. He seized land, then blamed others." The room erupted, some standing, some slapping tables, others frozen. Blackwell moved forward, face twitching, finger trembling as he pointed at Thomas. "You'll regret this. I'll bury you, you and all who turn on me." Silas stepped up, putting himself between Amara and Thomas. "No, Blackwell," he said, voice low and sure. "This time, you will pay." Sheriff Davis rose and walked to the center of the room. His face was old but firm. "I was afraid of you, Gerald. Not today." He removed his badge and placed it on the table. "I will not serve as sheriff under a man like you. If there's any justice left on this land, you will be tried like any other man." Blackwell howled and fought back, but the crowd moved in. The gavel thudded to the floor, a dry, final sound, the end of an poem. Era. As the crowd slowly dispersed, no one had words for Amara, only heavy, sincere bows and looks. A mother stepped forward and took her hand. "Miss Langston, thank you. Now my child can learn in a town no longer shadowed." Amara smiled softly, throat tight. She glanced at Thomas. He gave a small nod, half apology, half well-wishing. Silas remained in the corner, his eyes never leaving her. In the dim light slicing through the window, he stepped forward. No words were needed. A single nod spoke for both of them. In that silence she understood. His honor was returned, not by court decree alone, but by the courage of those who had been forced to keep quiet. The night ended slowly, like ash settling after a great blaze. When Amara stepped out of the wooden hall where the meeting had just ended, the air still held the smell of oil lamps and sweat. Voices faded. Footsteps and the neighing of horses receded into the dark. Outside, the sky was strangely clear, the moon high and bright, lighting the dusted road with silver. Silas stood at the foot of the steps. He did not come forward. He simply waited. Dust still clung to his coat, and beneath his hat brim, his eyes glowed like a small ember in the dark. She paused and looked around. Behind her, the town divided itself into two halves, those who still turned away in fear, and those who bowed their heads as she passed, quiet and changed. No words were needed. She understood. What they had seen had set something turning in them. She descended the last step. Silas gave a small nod and offered his hand. "Let's go," he said. There was no question where. Just leaving that place where words could be twisted, where justice had only just begun to stir, was enough. They walked together down the dirt lane away from the town center. Moonlight stretched along the roofs, dusted silver. In the distance, the mountain line lay still, as if eavesdropping on the things they left unsaid. "Are you tired?" he asked, voice hoarse. "No," she answered. "Only light." "You made them listen. I never thought that could happen in Redemption Creek." She gave a small smile. "They didn't listen to me, Silas. They listened to their own conscience, what Blackwell tried to make them forget." He fell quiet. Only crickets and the soft sound of their boots in damp sand filled the night. "And him?" he asked. "Men like Blackwell don't fall quickly, but the crack is there." "And will you stay?" "Yes." Her answer came soft and steady, like an arrow finding its mark. "Even if it costs you everything," he said quietly. She stopped and looked at him. Moonlight revealed the scars and harsh lines time had carved into his face, but in her eyes there were no wounds, only the man who had dared to stand on the right side when the world turned against him. "If I leave, who will teach the children that justice is worth holding?" she asked. He smiled, rueful. "You sound like a tree." "Maybe I am." "And me? I thought I was a stone. And now? Now I know. Even stone can bloom if it's near the right person." Her lips pressed together, a smile hidden there. They continued walking, hands brushing now and then. A small touch, enough to send warmth along her arm and into her chest. When they reached the Silverhorn, the breeze carried the scent of water and wet grass. The creek mirrored the moon, a thread of silver stitching night to earth. Silas paused and said softly, "Do you remember the first time we met here?" "I remember," she answered. "You told me to leave you, and I told you to be quiet." He gave a short, cracked laugh that still sounded warm. "And since then, I have never beaten you." "Because I don't fight," she said, a playful light in her eyes. "I walk straight through the storm, and you keep following." Silas watched her a long moment. Not following, walking with. At that, the air seemed to stop. Moonlight fell on the water, wind moving through the cottonwoods. She looked up. He stepped closer, his green-gray eyes reflecting the sky. "If more storms come," he said quietly, "we will face them together." She said nothing. She only smiled, a small, bright fissure in winter ice. Then she took a step nearer, lifted her face, and he bent down. That kiss was not like the first, not hungry, but warm with trust. Slow and light, yet sure, as if the two had just pledged something without words. When they separated, Amara kept her gaze on his. "The night is clear tonight," she said. "It is," he answered, still holding her hand. "The storm passed, but tomorrow morning we still must fight. Then we will fight together." They stood by the Silverhorn a long time, until the moon slid past the mountain peak and the water stilled like glass. And there, in the land that had long divided them, two people chose to stay. Not for safety, but because they believed peace had to be reclaimed by their own hands. Spring came slowly, as if even the earth hesitated after such a long winter. The last patches of snow melted down the hillsides, uncovering blades of young grass, green as new silk. The Silverhorn, frozen for months beneath ice, now sang again, its voice clear and bright, the familiar sound of life returning. Amara still taught in the small school beside the church. Children ran laughing through the yard, their cotton clothes streaked with dust, their joy ringing under the morning sun. Silas was no longer the outcast he once had been. People now nodded to him on the street. A few men even lifted their heads when he passed. Redemption Creek, slowly but surely, was learning to believe again. That morning, Silas appeared at the school gate, reins in hand, his old coat cleaner than usual. "Class out early today?" he asked, a faint smile touching his mouth. "Not until noon." "Then after noon, I want to take you somewhere." She raised a brow, curious. "Far?" "Only far enough to forget this town for a while." That afternoon, they rode along the Silverhorn. The sun tilted west, scattering shards of light across the water like broken mirrors. Amara sat behind him, her hands resting lightly at his waist. His warmth seeped through the coat, merging with the wind, with their even breath, the quiet language of two people who no longer needed words. When the horse stopped, before them lay a small valley encircled by tall cottonwoods. At its center, a spring bubbled up from the earth, crystal clear, bending and flowing onward. "This is where it all begins," Silas said softly. "My father called it the heart of the Silverhorn." She dismounted and crouched by the water, where the sky reflected pale blue. Mist rose gently from the surface, carrying the scent of soil and life. "What did your father say about it?" "He said whoever keeps this spring alive keeps the land alive. But he taught me something else." Silas looked down at the water, his tone deepening. "He said water only flows where patience guides it. Block it, and it finds another path. Force it, and it breaks stone. Life is the same." Amara listened quietly. She knew he wasn't only speaking of the creek. He turned back toward her, eyes deep green and calm as still water. When Sarah died, I thought I'd lost every source I had. I lived like dry earth, waiting for rain that never came. Then you arrived, Amara. You didn't bring a storm, you brought silence, and your silence carried water. Her breath caught. Her heart thudded in rhythm with his voice. I kept this, he said, reaching into his coat and drawing out a small object. Light caught on its surface. An old ring, simple, worn by time, the stone faint but still clear. My mother wore it all her life, he said. She told me to give it only to the one who makes the water in my heart run again. He stepped closer. Amara, you are that source. Like this, spring. Not loud, not bright, but irreplaceable. If you'll have me, I want to rebuild everything with you. From this land, from this water, from us. His voice didn't tremble, yet his breath hitched in the stillness. Between the sound of the stream and the whisper of wind through the leaves, his words felt like an ancient prayer. Amara's eyes shimmered with warmth. Silas, she whispered, if you are the earth, then let me be the rain. Rain doesn't stay forever, but every time it returns, it brings life. He lowered his head. She reached out, her honey-colored hand resting in his. The ring slid over her finger perfectly, as if it had waited for her all along. She smiled, a gentle smile that softened the light around them. Yes, Silas Grayson, I will. A breeze rose, scattering wildflower petals from the hillside. They swirled around them like white rain. Light shimmered across the water, reflecting their joined silhouettes. Two people, two colors, two histories, now beating as one. They kissed, slow and deep, without hesitation this time. In the scent of earth and sound of running water, every wound, every fear dissolved. Above them, the sky turned to pale gold, and in that glow, the spring kept flowing, as if remembering how life, no matter how broken, always finds its way home. The following spring, sunlight poured over Silverhorn land, warm and soft as honey. On the hillside once buried under frost, green grass spread like a new quilt, and the cottonwoods trembled with tender leaves. Beneath them, the creek still ran clear, carrying the quiet sound of the earth's steady breath. It was here that Silas and Amara chose to marry. No white dress, no preacher, only a handful of friends, Mrs. Campbell, the school children, and even some townsfolk who once turned away now came to stand with them. The wind lifted strips of rough linen hanging from the branches, and laughter mingled with the running water, drifting far down the valley. Silas wore a clean but faded shirt, his wrists still bronzed by the sun. Amara's pale blue dress brushed against the dust, yet her eyes shone brighter than any gem. When he took her hand, the oldest man in town, Mr. Lyle, once a miner under Blackwell, offered a simple blessing. May this water never run dry, and may human hearts do the same. They exchanged rings beneath the white light of morning. No vows of forever, only a shared nod. Two people who understood that happiness was not a miracle, but a daily choice. To stay, to believe, to love. That year, the town began to change. Blackwell vanished from Redemption Creek after evidence of his fraud reached the federal court. His land was divided among the townsfolk. The school expanded, and the Silverhorn's water became common property once more. Amara kept teaching. Her classroom grew crowded with laughter and chalk dust. She taught the children from pages she'd written by hand under lamplight, maps of places they had never seen, words of a world that could be kind. Silas rebuilt his small ranch by the creek, raising horses and cutting hay. Their life was simple, but full of laughter. A year later, their daughter was born. They named her Sarah, to remember the woman who was gone, turning forgiveness into life. A few years later, came James, with his father's green-gray eyes and his mother's gentle smile. The small house by the Silverhorn became a stop for travelers, a place where passers-by paused to hear children's laughter spilling across the porch and see chimney smoke blend softly with the morning mist. Years passed. Silas's hair silvered, Amara's hands slowed, still faintly scented of chalk. His skin bore the burn of sunlit days in the field. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the creek gleam in the sunset. Sarah darted through the yard, James chasing the family dog. The whole world seemed to shrink into that patch of earth, between the sound of water and the whispering leaves. Silas set down his cup of tea and looked toward the distance. I used to think this creek would dry up when men dammed it, tried to steal its source. Amara smiled. But it kept flowing. It did, because the land learned to forgive, same as people. She rested her head against his shoulder. Love isn't a miracle, Silas. It's courage. The courage to stay when everything else can fall apart. He murmured, and to believe that what's lost can still grow again. The wind carried the scent of grass and water. Amara closed her eyes, listening to the creek hum, a sound not loud, not grand, but steady as a promise. Some loves don't begin with miracles, but with patience, like the Silverhorn that keeps flowing, though once dammed and forgotten. Amara and Silas never conquered anything, never had fortune or power on their side. They simply chose to remain, to trust, and to water the earth with kindness a little more each day. Years rolled on, and the creek still ran between green hills, a witness to a love that had learned forgiveness and how to stand after the storm. And perhaps, no matter our age, each of us carries a Silverhorn of our own, a place that once hurt, once lost, yet never truly ran dry. If this story touched your heart, leave a thought below about the creek, about memory, or about someone you once held close. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so together we can keep alive these gentle Wild West love stories, where love never runs dry, as long as we keep believing in it.